Hey everyone, so this week we are going to do a version essentially of what we did last week, but we're going to do it using JSON data as our source rather than existing CSV data. So all of the everything that we learned last week still applies, but what we're going to look at now is how do we use Python to parse data when the original format is not already CSV. So this is actually pretty straightforward to do, and I think you'll recognize that the code is actually very similar. But this just shows you that we don't need to start with a CSV file in order to be able to use Python to parse it or to create a CSV file. And then we're also going to explore ways that we can use strategies either with JSON or ultimately with CSV files to run the same Python script on structured data, multiple copies of the structured data that appears in, say, a given folder, and even set up a script that will automatically download our data at regular intervals. So that tends to be most applicable to JSON formatted data because that's how real-time data tends to be published, and we'll see an example of that here. So what that means is that rather than going for my historical files here, I'm going to come to the City Bike page, and I'm going to go to get the GBFS feed here and click on that. And remember that what this brings us to actually is not initially the feed of stations, it is the feed of feeds. So you see system alert, station status, right? This is giving you all the different kinds of things that it can include. And I am going to look at this one, okay, which I'm pretty sure is what we have previously examined in class. And this is sort of like what's going on at the given stations right now. So again, what we see here is our last updated, right? And this is, we talked about how this is our Unix time this is the Unix timestamp for when this was last updated. The TTL is time to live, and then we have the data, and then we have a list of stations, and it's going to give us the ID. It gives us an external ID, latitude, longitude. Actually, this doesn't look like what I want. Nope, never mind. I don't want the station information. What do I want? I want station status. Let's see how that does. Boop. This seems more useful. Okay, number of bikes available. So very similar, still have the last updated, time to live, stations, and then it gives me the ID number, the number of bikes available, the number of bikes that are disabled, docks that are available, docks that are disabled, et cetera, et cetera. So actually has some of the same information, not entirely. It gives you the last time that the station reported in. So the last time, I guess, it updated the City Bike system, and we can kind of go on from there. So what I want to be able to do with this is I want to be able to use this to get a snapshot of what is happening, what the availability of bikes and docks is at all the stations around the city at any given point in time. And as time goes by, I'm going to see an update, right? That this is actually updating very frequently. And I can check and see how things have changed. Again, by writing a script that parses this and then compares the numbers. So while on its surface, this may look very different from dealing with our CSV data, as we're going to see when we start scripting, it's actually very similar. We're going to use a for loop, we're going to use a conditional statement. Actually, I don't think we need a conditional statement, because what you'll notice here, I hope, right, is, or be reminded of, is that if we see the square brackets here, this is a list, right? And what that means is that I can I can treat this as though every single station in this list is a row of data, right? And all I need to be able to do is loop through this list of station rows and append the various values, right? The station ID, the number of bikes available, etc., to a row, and then write that to a CSV, just like I did when I started with a CSV. So to illustrate that, let's flip over to Adam and get started. Now, I just wanted to, somebody asked about how to get the nice folder view on the left-hand side. If I say open a project, it's actually just opening a folder. And so if you say I want to open a project, whoops, I actually want to do this. Let's try that again. Right. In this case, I don't have anything in here yet, but I'm going to start with a new file. Okay. And I'm going to call this, I'm going to save this as JSON parser.py, right? So there's my file. Now, the question is, how do I get a copy of this data, of my target data to work on? turns out this is actually very easy. Because the JSON data is itself just text, and that's actually also how it appears in this HTML page, I can actually just Control A, select all, Control C or Apple C, copy, and I can put this into a text file. So I'm actually going to do this in Atom as well because there's no reason not to. So I'm going to create a new file in Atom. I'm just going to paste this in willy-nilly, right? And I'm going to save this. Again, I'm going to do a save as here. And I like doing this in Atom because it's not going to cause me any grief with, you know, curly quotes or anything like that. And we'll test this and make sure that it's the case. But I'm going to call this citybike data.json, right? So again, my file extension here, all it does is say, this is the kind of data that I have. And you can see that Atom absolutely understands this. It started color coding for me. So it's seeing the numbers, right? Or seeing the quoted numbers, it's seeing the distinct numbers, etc. So I'm not doing any filtering on this. All I'm doing is converting it. So I'm less concerned with the data types, but just to see that I can handle lots of different types of files in here. So I'm not, well, I'll keep this view open for now because it might make a handy reference. First question I need to ask though is, how am I going to get this data loaded in? Well, just the same way that there is a handy dandy library for dealing with CSVs, there is a handy dandy library for dealing with JSON. Now I'm actually going to import both the JSON and the CSV library, and the reason why I'm doing that is because I hate these autofill things. Good grief, leave me alone. Is because although I'm loading JSON, I'm writing CSV, right? So I still want to make myself a CSV writer the way we did last week, because that's just going to make writing my rows to my output file easier. Okay, so now how do we tell, what do we need to do? We need to obviously create a source file. Okay, and in this case, I'm going to use the JSON library, and the method instead of open is going to be load. Sorry, I misspoke there. First I'm going to, well, let's just do this. I'm sort of going out of order here, right? But basically, the parallel here is I'm going to first open my file, and of course, my data file is the citybike_JSON. Oh, sorry, citybike_data.json, right? And what am I doing with it? I'm reading it. Okay, and so now very similarly to the way last time we had the CSV reader, right, or the dictionary reader, and we said, you know, create the reader, this time we're just saying JSON.load. And so we're going to the JSON library, we're saying load the data, and by the way, that is going to expect a JSON format. That's going to allow us to access all of the parameters inside our JSON data without difficulty. So just to make sure that things are going okay now, again, we always want to be sort of testing incrementally here. I'm going to just do a quick print, and I'm going to look at something that only appears once in the file, which is my last updated. Okay, so you see that this appears at the top of the file. It is outside that list of stations. So I'm just going to ask it to print the last updated, right? And it's right, quote unquote, at the top, right? So I can just say JSON data dot is how I access those parameters, dot last updated. So I'm going to say JSON data dot last updated. Let's see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to get week 5. Oops, doesn't like it. Okay, so I haven't actually kind of keyed into my data quite right. Let me take a look at this. Sorry, that was my mistake. It's actually going to be much more similar to what we did last time. It's just going to be last updated. So we'll get there in a second, but actually, let me look at my error. No, yeah, okay. So let's see if I have more luck this time. Make sure I'm saved. There we go. Okay, this is what I expect. So what I can see is that I have, I'm able to access that first element just by saying JSON data and give it the name of the property. Now the question is, of course, I need to be able to move through this entire list this entire list of stations. And where is that list of stations contained? Well, we know it's in data, right? And then inside stations, and then there's going to be a list after that. So the question is, how do we say, first go to the data property, then go to the stations property, and then give me every element in that list? And the answer is we're going to do that exactly the same way that we access this last updated, except we're going to do it in sequence. So what do I mean by that? It means that we're going to start with the first thing that we need, which is, so we're going to say for a station in, and now where is our list? Well, we know that it starts in JSON data, right? But it's not just this top line of JSON data, right? It's inside, right? Because we can see here this bracket, it's inside the data parameter. So I can just paste that here. And within data, it's inside a property called stations, right? So what I'm saying is for every station, right? And we know that each station is its own object that has a bunch of properties, station ID, yada, yada, yada. For every one of those, just go through it. And now what do I want to do? Well, it's a for loop for now. Again, I'm just going to test that things are working the way that I think they are. I'm going to say print a station ID, right? So what I'm hoping to find is that it's going to print me a list of station IDs. And in fact, it does. So that's a good start. Now I just need to do the same thing that I did with my original CSV writer, make an output file, and append everything to a new row in order to get it to that writer. So my first step is I'm of course going to create a row array. So I'm going to say new row, right? It's empty. Now the first thing I'm actually going to append to this new row is, I'm actually going to say start time. And the reason why I want to keep track of the execution time and put it in every row is it's going to act like a kind of identifier. Because when I start to process multiple files with the same script, I want to make sure that each row is timestamped, basically, right? So that if I want to see what happened to a single station over time, I have the individual timestamps, even if I sort or filter by the row, by the station ID, for example, right? So that's going to be the first thing that I do. And now the next thing that I need to do is actually just loop through in a station, right? And so I'm actually doing another for loop here where I'm saying, look, for every element that appears in a given station, I want to just append the value that appears there to my new row, right? So this is, again, very similar to what we've done previously. We're just doing it on JSON data instead of on CSV data. So I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to say new row append a station attribute. Okay, so this is sort of like our a row, a call last time. It's a station attribute. Okay, so what next? Well, I'm actually kind of almost finished. I do need to, of course, create an output file. So I'm going to say output file equals, not a good name, right? And that's going to be writable. And then, of course, I'm going to have output writer equals CSV writer output file, right? So I'm creating a new writer. And once I'm done with that second for loop, right? So within my first for loop, because I'm going to write every single row, I'm going to say, but outside of the for loop for every column, essentially every attribute, I'm going to say output writer dot write row, new row, and then I'm going to come out here and say source close and output file dot close, right? Okay, so we're going to come back in just a minute and see if this worked the way we hoped.